So it's amazing to me as I age. I've learned this as watching my kids. I've learned how much more I know now than I used to know. I don't feel like I've changed, but somehow I know that much more. Have you ever noticed that pattern? That you know a whole bunch and then you don't know anything and suddenly you know a whole bunch? Right? Like, an example is from a couple of years ago. My daughter Emily and her spouse, her partner Bob, were here and for the holidays, and of course I get up early and get the coffee going, and my daughter is somewhat of a coffee connoisseur, so she got up and I offered her a cup of my own pot of coffee and got kind of a sneer. She's a coffee connoisseur, so like the beans need to be ground right at that moment because you can taste the difference if they're not ground right in that moment, kind of, okay. And you got to pour it over just so. I don't get it. But anyway, she didn't want any of my coffee. And then she made the comment of, well, it's half calf anyway. Kind of like, why would I want that? She just kind of sneered and I was just like, okay, whatever. But then I got a little owly about that, as I have want to do, and I was just like, well, you don't have to scoff at my coffee. Coffee's perfectly fine. And like every child would do to their parent, she went, well, I don't do that. In one of the great son-in-law moments of all time, her husband looked at her and went, yeah, you did. Points for Bob. Fast forward 3 years, and now she's a deployed staff member, so she works at home most of the time. And as she was talking about this new experience of working from home, she was just like, man, and I learned that I just can't sit around and drink coffee all day. I mean, I've got started brewing half calf. And I went, really? It's amazing how much you learn when you never change in the eyes of your children, right? Society has always been hard on dads, and maybe that's somewhat self-inflicted, but society continues to be hard on dads. And certainly American society has been much harder on dads than other societies have been. It's kind of a cute part of our U.S. culture. And fathers are important to children, but at the same time, it's amazing to see this trajectory. I found this list, and we're going to divide it in half so it's more easily readable, but this list, I think, summarizes it pretty well. 5 years old, your dad knows everything. At 7 years old, your dad knows. At 10 years old, well, maybe my dad doesn't know. At 12 years old, dad doesn't know. At 14 years old, dad's going crazy, or cray-cray. Right? 16 years old, can't take dad seriously. 18 years old, what does dad know? 22 years old, dad is talking rubbish. That's probably not the word that the kids use, but more suitable for church. At 24 years old, I know more than dad. At 26 years old, dad seems to know some things after all. At 30 years old, think I should ask dad about this. At 40 years old, it's amazing how dad went through all this. 45 years old, dad's been right all along. And at 50 years old, if dad were here, I could have learned a lot from him. That is the trajectory we see. Well, study after study has shown the importance of fathers in our lives and the outcomes of having a father in the home, and even more than that, an engaged father in the home. The National Fatherhood Initiative did a longitudinal study. They studied fathers and father relationships over decades, and this is what they've learned. Again, a long list, so let's divide it in half. That children who have an active father in their home are better able to control their emotions. They have better physical health. They have healthier relationships. They feel safe and confident. We can go to the next. They are less likely to use drugs and alcohol. They perform better in school. They are less likely to be poor, and they are more likely to stay out of trouble. Again, an engaged father creates better outcomes for children. And fathers are starting to learn this more. This chart, again, is from the National Fatherhood Initiative, and it is the Institute for Family Studies, and it is showing how, and this is new research up to 2022, how much more time in the yellow fathers are spending with their children than what has been previously noted. Fathers are making the life choice to spend more time with their children than ever before. That's become a more important factor in young parents who are men, and that's a good thing. There are 3 basic roles they go over as to the roles that a father plays in the life of their children. It used to be that a dad would focus on one of these 3, and I think fathers are now trying to focus on more than one. The first is provider. And again, I grew up in a generation that's what dads did. They provided for their kids. And my dad certainly provided for me. He wasn't around a lot, but he provided much. Depending on where you live, your socioeconomics specifically, or even more importantly, even where you live internationally, protector becomes more of a thing. It's less of a thing in today's society among our demographic here at Sheridan, but protecting children and protecting the family is something that dads do. And then finally, the third role is mentor and disciplinarian. Now, those sound very different from one another, but they're actually very much the same. They keep you on the right path, is essentially it. Whether they are disciplining you to get you off of a bad behavior or mentoring you, rewarding you to stay with a good behavior, it's still the guardrails that keep you going down the road. And so these are the 3 roles that fathers normally and usually play. The one role that's not on there that I just want to emphasize is the role of being a friend. Please note that that isn't a role that fathers should play. I see parents, both men and women, try to do that all the time, try to be their child's friend that is laden with poor outcomes. And so strike that from your list if you think that should be on your list. But the 3 roles that fathers are to play are provider, protector, and then mentor/disciplinarian. And what we find is that, again, fathers are more invested now than ever in the lives of their child. And this is really good and really helpful, because what it does is it puts then the child in the position to respect the father, so that when wisdom is sought to be passed along, that wisdom is ready to be received, because the father has earned the privilege of being able to speak into the child's circumstance. And passing that wisdom on from one generation to another is the way of faith. And it is what the Bible talks about in terms of relationship dynamics between fathers and children over the course of all of Scripture, but specifically in the book of Proverbs. I want to invite and encourage you to open the Pew Bible to 574. We're looking at Proverbs 3, but here's what you have to understand about the book of Proverbs. It is basically summarized as a father's sage instruction to save his child. That's what fathers do, is they give instructions to save their child. Now, I have to wonder personally, because this book is probably between 2,000 and 3,000 years old, these writings, I have to wonder if this is just not a response to the human condition. That if kids have never listened to their dads, and that's why this book was written 3,000 years ago, because it was still a problem even back then. And so this book was written so that father's wisdom is passed along, and it says father's wisdom passed along to the son. And while that sounds very gender specific and unfair, again, it is written into a culture in which women did not have a voice in society. But what evens it out and levels it out is that the very concept of wisdom, Sophia, is a feminine concept. And so understand that the wisdom passed on is kind of gender neutral, if you will. It all culminates in Proverbs 22:6, And you can see this text here, start children off on the way they should go, and even when they're old, they will not turn from it. Isn't that what fathers and Father's Day should be about? The wisdom that we pass along to our children through our lived experience so that we can make their lives better. And the reason why we chose Proverbs 3 specifically is because it points exactly to the reason why. This is an issue of the heart. If you look at chapter 3, verse 1, verse 3, and verse 5, it's all rooted in the heart. When we really love our children, we want them to be better. When we love our children, we want to pass along those things that will make their lives better. The wisdom that we seek to push forward is the wisdom of good living, of right choices, of those things that are helpful. So again, in verse 1, my child, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. In verse 3, do not let loyalty and faithfulness forsake you, but bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. And then in verse 5, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not rely on your own insights. When we love our children to the depths of our heart, we seek to make their lives better. Father's wisdom lived for their child. The example I'll leave you with is a very unconventional example for Father's Day, but it's one that's really good, I think. And that is, I'll leave you with the example of Billie Jean King. Billie Jean King, again, you may remember, was an amazing tennis player. And she was a pioneer, certainly a pioneer in women's sports. If you want to know why we were able to draw 92,003 to Memorial Stadium to watch women play volleyball, it all traces back to Billie Jean King, who advocated for equal and fair treatment of athletes, no matter the gender. She was the first and the one to ensure equal footing for both men and women, especially in college athletics. Now, her athletic prowess is pretty amazing. She won 20 Wimbledon titles. She started her own professional women's tennis league. She was the first female athlete ever to earn $100,000, which in the 70s was a super big deal. And in 1990, when Time magazine listed their top 100 Americans, she made that list. She wasn't the top 100 women athletes. She wasn't even the top 100 athletes in America. She was in the top 100 people in America because of the impact she had on equality in women's sports. And in a time in which women were considered to be physically and even mentally inferior to men, she destroyed Bobby Riggs in the Challenge of the Sexes and made the point that women are just as strong, if not stronger, than men. Well, she traces all of that back, and as she tells her own story, she traces that all back to her father. Believe it or not, she traces it all back to him and the sage advice and wisdom that he gave her. You see, Billie Jean King's father was actually an athletic trainer in the Navy, and then when he was honorably discharged, he became a firefighter and first responder for more than 30 years. And she said, while it wasn't commonly talked about, everyone in their family knew that every day that he walked out the door, they weren't sure whether or not he would return, because that's the nature of what it means to be a firefighter. And she was really sympathetic to that. And she said that he learned to live for the moment, to live for each day, not to be mired in the past or not to be worried about the future, but that he, because of his profession, learned to live in the moment and for the day. And what he taught her was this. He said to her, focus on your character, not on your reputation. Reputation is what other people think about you. Character is what you understand about yourself. Focus on character, not on reputation. So, she goes on to talk about how when she was 9 years old, she got into tennis and she really took to it and loved it. She had to save her own money to buy her own Wilson racket. And she bought her first tennis racket, and it cost her $9.28. And she loved it so much that she brought it and put it in her bed with her while she slept. And she honed her skills. And she became really good. And eventually she was in a local tournament. And you know what? The local newspaper, back in the days when, every town had their little newspaper, it covered that tournament. And you know what? She didn't even win a game. She got destroyed in that tournament. She lost 6-love. And she read the write-up about her tennis match in the local paper, and it just about destroyed her as a young woman. And her dad said, don't ever read another clipping again. That's what other people think about you. Focus on yourself. Focus on this day. And then he said, because you're good, and I don't want you to read newspaper clippings and have you get too full of yourself. She had never won a thing, and he believed in her so much that he knew she would make it. From that experience, she wrote this. I learned the importance of valuing each moment, of carrying on and doing your best, no matter the difficulties, and of having a strong sense of self. So dads, on this Father's Day, continue to invest in your children so that you can earn the right to impart your wisdom. And to do that when, indeed, when the time comes, that they are ready to receive it. And always remember that the wisdom that you impart is out of your heart and out of the love that you have for your children. And may that wisdom bring your children to greater faith. Happy Father's Day. Amen.